Page 196. The 4 cots in our cell left an aisle in the middle where the table stood, but several days after my arrival they put a 5th person in with us and inserted a cot crosswise. They brought in the newcomer an hour before rising time, that brief, sweet, cerebral last hour, and 3 of us did not lift our heads. Only Gramarenko jumped up to sponge some tobacco and maybe with it some material for the interrogator. They began to converse in a whisper, and we tried not to listen, but it was quite impossible not to overhear the newcomer's whisper. It was so loud, so disquieting, and so tense and so close to a sob that we realized it was no ordinary grief that had entered our cell. The newcomer was asking whether many were shot. Nonetheless, without turning my head, I called them down, asking them to talk more quietly. When, on the signal to rise, we all instantly jumped up. Lying abed can earn you the punishment cell. We saw a general, no less. True, he wasn't wearing any insignia of rank, not even tabs, nor could one see where his insignia had been torn off or unscrewed. But his expensive tunic, his soft overcoat, indeed his entire face and figure, told us that he was unquestionably a general, in fact, a typical general, and most certainly a full general, and not one of your run-of-the-mill major generals. He was short, stocky, very broad of shoulder and body, and notably fat in the face. But this fat, which had been acquired by eating well, endowed him not with an appearance of good-natured accessibility, but with an air of weighty importance, of affiliation with the highest ranks. The crowning part of his face was, to be sure, not the upper portion, but the lower, which resembled a bulldog's jaw. It was there that his energy was concentrated, along with his will and authoritativeness, which were what had enabled him to attain such rank by early middle age. We introduced ourselves, and it turned out that LVZ was even younger than he appeared. He would be 36 that year, if they don't shoot me. Even more surprisingly, it developed that he was not a general at all, not even a colonel, and not even a military man, but an engineer. An engineer? I had grown up among engineers, and I could remember the engineers of the 20s very well indeed. Their open, shining intellects, their free and gentle humor, their agility and breadth of thought, the ease with which they shifted from one engineering field to another, and for that matter from technology to social concerns and art. Then too they personified good manners and delicacy of taste, well-bred speech that flowed evenly and was free of uncultured words. One of them might play a musical instrument, another dabble in painting, and their faces always bore a spiritual imprint. From the beginning of the 30s, I had lost contact with that milieu. Then came the war, and here before me stood an engineer, one of those who had replaced those destroyed. No one could deny him one point of superiority. He was much stronger, more visceral than those others had been. His shoulders and hands retained their strength, even though they had not needed it for a long time. Freed from the restraints of courtesy, he stared sternly and spoke impersonally, as if he didn't even consider the possibility of a dissenting view. He had grown up differently from those others too, and he worked differently. His father had plowed the earth in the most literal sense. Lenya ZV had been one of those disheveled, unenlightened peasant boys whose wasted talents so distressed Belinsky and Tolstoy. He was certainly no Lomonosov, and he could never have gotten to the academy on his own, but he was talented. If there had been no revolution, he would have plowed the land, and he would have become well-to-do because he was energetic and attractive, and he might have raised himself into the merchant class. It being the Soviet period, however, he entered the Komsomol, and his work in the Komsomol, overshadowing his other talents, lifted him out of anonymity out of his lowly state, out of the countryside, and shot him like a rocket through the workers' school right into the industrial academy. He arrived there in 1929 at the very moment when those others were being driven in whole herds into Gulag. It was urgently necessary for those in power to produce their own engineers, politically conscious, loyal 100%ers who were to become bigwigs of production, Soviet businessmen, in fact, rather than people who did things themselves. That was the moment when the famous commanding heights overlooking the as yet uncreated industries were empty, and it was the fate of ZV's class in the industrial academy to occupy them. ZV's life became a chain of triumphs, a garland winding right up to the peak. Those were the exhausting years from 1929 to 1933, when the Civil War was being waged, not as in 1918 and 1920, with the Ch.5 machine guns mounted on horse-drawn carts, but with police dogs, when the long lines of those dying of famine trudged toward the railroad stations in the hope of getting to the cities, which is where the bread grains were evidently ripening, but were refused tickets and were unable to leave, and lay dying beneath the station fences in a submissive human heap of homespun coats and bark shoes. In those same years, ZV not only did not know that bread was rationed to city dwellers, but at a time when a manual laborer was receiving 60 rubles a month in wages, he enjoyed a student scholarship of 900 rubles a month. ZV's heart did not ache for the countryside whose dust he had shaken from his feet. His new life was already soaring somewhere elsewhere among the victors and the leaders. He never had time to be an ordinary run-of-the-mill foreman. He was immediately assigned to a position which he had dozens of engineers and thousands of workers under him. He was the chief engineer of the big construction projects outside Moscow. From the very beginning of the war, he, of course, had an exemption from military service. He was evacuated to Alma-Ata together with the department he worked for, and in this area he bossed even bigger construction projects on the Iine River, but in this case his workers were prisoners. The sight of those little gray people bothered him very little at the time, nor did it inspire him to any real appraisals, nor compel him to take a closer look. In that gleaming orbit in which he circled, the only important thing was to achieve the project total's fulfillment of the plan, and it was quite enough for ZV merely to punish a particular construction unit, a particular camp, a particular work superintendent. After all, it was up to them to manage and fulfill their norm with their own resources. How many hours they had to work to do it, or what ration they had to get along on, were details that didn't concern him. The war years deep in the rear were the best years of ZV's life, such as the eternal and universal aspect of war. The more grief it accumulates at one of its poles, the more joy it generates at the other. ZV had not only a bulldog's jaw, but also a swift, enterprising, business-like grasp. With the greatest skill and he immediately switched to the economy's new wartime rhythm. Everything for victory, give and take, and the war will write it all off. He made just one small concession to the war. He got along without suits and neckties, and camouflaging himself in khaki color, had chrome leather boots made to order, and donned a general's tunic, the very one in which he appeared before us. That was fashionable and not uncommon at the time. It provoked neither anger in the war-wounded nor reproachful glances from women. Women usually looked at him with another sort of glance. They came to him to get well fed, to get warmed up, and to have some fun. He had wild money passing through his hands. His billfold bulged like a little barrel with expense money, and to him 10-ruble notes were like kopecks, and thousands like single rubles. Phoebe didn't hoard them, regret spending them, or keep count of them. He counted only the women who passed through his hands, and particularly those he had uncorked. This count was his sport. In the cell he assured us that his arrest had broken off the count at 290 plus, and he regretted that he had not reached 300, since it was wartime and the women were alone and lonely. And since, in addition to his power and money, he had the virility of a Rasputin, one can probably believe him, and he was quite prepared to describe one episode after another. It was just that our ears were not prepared to listen to him. Even though no danger threatened him during those last years, he had fanatically grabbed these women, messed them up, and then throw them away, like a greedy diner eating boiled crayfish, grabbing one, devouring it, sucking it, and then grabbing the next. He was so accustomed to the malleability of material that his own vigorous boar-like drive across the land. Whenever he was especially agitated, he would dash about the cell like a powerful boar who just might knock down an oak tree in its path. He was so accustomed to an environment in which all the leaders were his own kind of people, in which he could always make a deal or work things out, cover them up. He forgot that the more success one gains, the more envy one arouses. As he found out during his interrogation, a dossier had been accumulating against him way back in 1936 on the basis of an anecdote he had carelessly told at a drunken party. More denunciations had followed, and more testimony from agents. After all, one has to take women to restaurants where all types of people see you. Another report pointed out that he had been in no hurry to leave Moscow in 1941, that he had been waiting for the Germans. He had, in actual fact, stayed longer than he should have, apparently because of some woman. Stevie took great care to keep his business deals clean, but he quite forgot the existence of Article 58. Nonetheless, the avalanche might not have overwhelmed him had he not grown overconfident and refused to supply building materials for certain prosecutors' dacha. That was what caused his dormant case to awaken and tremble and start rolling. And this was one more instance of the fact that cases began with the material self-interest of the Blue Boys. The scope of Stevie's concepts of the world can be judged by the fact that he believed there was a Canadian language. During the course of 2 months in the cell, he did not read a single book, not even a whole page. And if he did read a paragraph, it was only to be distracted from his gloomy thoughts about his interrogation. It was clear from his conversation that he had read even less in freedom. He knew of Pushkin as a hero of bawdy stories, and of Tolstoy he knew only, in all probability, that he was a deputy of the Supreme Soviet. On the other hand, he was 100% loyal to communism. Was he that same socially conscious proletarian who had been brought up to replace Palchinsky and von Meck and their ilk? This was what was really surprising. He was most certainly not. We once discussed the whole course of the war with him, and I said that from the very first moment, I had never had any doubts about our victory over the Germans. He looked at me sharply. He did not believe me. "Come on, what are you saying?" And then he took his head in his hands. "Oh, Sasha. Sasha. And I was convinced that the Germans would win. That's what did me in. There you are." He was one of the organizers of victory, but each day he believed the Germans' success and awaited their inevitable arrival, not because he loved them, but simply because he had so sober an insight into our economy, which I of course knew nothing about and therefore believed in. All of us in the cell were deeply depressed, but none of us was so crushed as C.V. None took his arrest as so profound a tragedy. He learned from us that he would get no more than a tenner. During his years in camp, he would, of course, be a work superintendent, and that he would not have to experience real suffering, as indeed he never did. But this did not comfort him in the least. He was too stricken by the collapse of such a glorious life. After all, it was his one and only life on earth, and no one else's, which had interested him all his 36 years, and more than once, sitting on his cot in front of the table, propping his pudgy head on his short, pudgy arm, he would start to sing quietly in a sing-song voice with a lost, befogged eyes. Grunt and abandoned since my young, early years, I was left a tiny orphan. He could never get any further than that, and at that point he would break into explosive sobs. All that bursting strength which could not break through the walls that enclosed him turned inward towards self-pity and towards pity for his wife. Every 10th day, since oftener was not allowed, his wife, long since unloved, brought him rich and bountiful food parcels, the whitest of white bread, butter and caviar, veal, sturgeon. He would give each of us a sandwich and a twist of tobacco, and then bend down to the provisions he had set before himself, delighting in odors and colors that contrasted vividly with the bluish potatoes and the old underground revolutionary festango. Then the tears would start to pour again, redoubled. He recalled out loud his wife's tears, whole years of tears, some due to love notes she had found in his trousers, some due to women's underpants in his overcoat pocket, stuffed there hurriedly in his automobile and forgotten. And when he was thus torn by burning self-pity, his armor of evil energy fell away, and before us was a ruined and clearly good person. I was astonished that he could sob so. The Estonian Arnold Susi, our cellmate with the gray bristles in his hair, explained it to me. Cruelty is invariably accompanied by sentimentality. It is the law of complementaries. For example, in the case of the Germans, the combination is a national trait. Festango, on the other hand, was the more cheerful person in the cell, even though, in view of his age, he was the only one who could not count on surviving and returning to freedom. Flinging an arm around my shoulders, he would say, "Stand up for the truth is nothing. To stand up for the truth is nothing. For truth you have to sit in jail." Or else he taught me to sing this song from Tsarist hard labor days. And if we have to perish in mines and prisons wet, our cause will never find renown our future generations yet. And I believe this. May these pages help his faith come true. Take a break there.